Hi, I'm Mike Stowe. I'm here at the Millville Army Airfield Museum, and today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the early days, some of the adventures, particularly on a P-47 propeller that I found in 1994. And we have a great story, and I'm anxious to tell everybody about it. Really, the story starts with the beginning of the museum. We had a temporary display that was set up in Building 5, which was the airport manager's office, over to the side. And then in the summer of 1984, we first set up in the present-day building. During that summer, a gentleman named Norman Bachman, who had been a P-47 pilot at Millville Airport, he came by and he dropped off this document. It was his statement about an accident he had. Now, I was always interested about the airplane accidents here, particularly those who lost their lives, and it was exciting to get new information. So he gave it to me. It talked about he was trying to troubleshoot a problem in the cockpit off of Delaware and got lower and lower, and pretty soon his prop started hitting the water, and he ditched his Thunderbolt. No major problem. He jumped in his dinghy and floated away, and they later dragged the airplane in. But I wanted to get the report for it. Now, at that time, in order to get airplane accident reports from the Air Force, you had to have a specific date, you had to pay for them, and they took forever to get them. And his copy of the document did not give the date of the incident. He said, well, sometime in, I think it was November of 1944. So I wrote to the Air Force and said, look, I need this report. I have all this information, the pilot's name. Can you find it for me? So instead of getting that report, I got a report on a mid-air collision of two Thunderbolts. And the two came together during a training mission, and the one airplane, according to the report, was, quote, nearly completely buried on impact. For me, young treasure hunter, this was gold. It was like, oh my God, I gotta find this. I gotta find this. This was 1984. I did preliminary work. Nothing in the newspapers. Over the years, I even went to the state police barracks, or the headquarters up in Trenton, and I went through their storage room and went through their big ledger logs of their dispatches. And sure enough, I found that two Army officers came into one barracks and asked if they knew about an airplane. They recorded that they radioed the other barracks. Neither knew anything, and the Army officers left. And that showed how elusive this site was going to be. Now, I had found a few. I found probably 5 or 10 around Millville Airport, and this one was just one bear to find. So years go by. The museum grew and grew and grew, and I started to go to do a lot more of the aircraft archaeology, particularly when I got a job at Atlantic City Airport with the Air National Guard. Now, Atlantic City had been a big Navy fighter training base. So with my background in Millville, my knowledge of World War II, and being right on a base where they had Hellcats and Corsairs and so forth, every chance I had, I talked to people about crashes and so forth around that area. So I found a couple of Hellcat crash sites. I found a Corsair. I found a couple Navy jets. I would go out, and whenever there was an event like a community fair or a display at the Air Guard base, I would set up my displays of the pieces I found, and I'd be quick to write down notes when somebody said, you know what, when I was a kid, I saw this, and when I saw that, and that's what led to me to all these sites. I had, one of these things led me to what had been a Navy PV-1 two-engine patrol bomber. It had been sold off after World War II and was being used by Carrier Air Conditioning Company, and it went down in a snowstorm in the 70s. Guy gave me directions. I went back there in the swamp. I pulled out like 10 truckloads of metal, including an engine. Learned a lot. Was some of the harshest terrain I ever worked in. So later on, another one of these events, somebody tells me, you know, down there off of English Creek Road behind the school, I remember that there was an airplane burned out there. It was just a burned wreckage of an airplane. I called the Navy to make sure they knew about it, but don't know whatever became of it. So all excited, oh, a new site. So I race out there, And I go around the school and I stop. There's a football field where he told me to go. And so this isn't good. Not willing to give up easily, I decided I was going to go way in the woods behind the football field to try to find some stray piece. At least I could see the airplanes. All the individual components are usually numbered. So if you can find a couple little pieces with paint on or anything, you can usually identify what kind of airplane it was. So I wandered out there. I was a good 200 yards back off. It was really, thinking about it, it was kind of insane, because even if somebody was going to drag something away from the airplane, they would have dragged it towards the road, not away from the road. But, you know, it's like I'm here anyway, so I'm playing with my metal detector, shotgun shell here, piece of rusty can there, and I walk up on this thing. And it's like, oh, wow, piece of an airplane. It's no paint or anything, so I assumed it was part of some private airplane, and I was like, wow, I'll keep looking. And I looked around, I found a couple more shotgun shells, and I laid it down on the ground, and I picked it up again, and I turned it around and looked at it like this. And then I noticed the distinctive cut patterns from being cut off with a propeller. That changed the whole story. I went home, and the heavier metal, it's definitely could be a military airplane. I flipped open the parts manuals to both a Thunderbolt and a Corsair, which both cases there had been some collisions in that area. And I matched up the lightning holes and the rivet patterns in the structure, and sure enough, it's a Thunderbolt. And to the collision I had heard about 10 years before. So that was the most promising thing that I had so far. I knew the area of the crash, but it was all densely the woods. It's like without a clue, I was still a long ways off. I got this idea, I think a friend suggested it. We went up to the New Jersey Forest Fire Service, and I think it was up in Burlington County. And they had an office there, they had a tree farm there, and they said, yeah, all those old records are back in this building. Feel free to go through them. We can't do a lot of Xeroxes, only a few. And I go through there, and the building was 2 rooms. One room, it was all leaking. One room was full of aerial photo contact prints, all curled up in balls from getting wet. But anyway, the one I found, just matter of factly, it was the McKee City Tower. That's the one near the fire tower near Hamilton Mall. The guy reported, it's just nonchalantly, is like, this was gold to me. He says, and I quote, "This was an airplane crash and burned in the hole it made in the swamp, but no woods caught fire. McKee Tower saw the smoke and notified section warden." It's like, it's just an airplane burning in the hole it made. Don't worry about anybody. Right date, right location, and sure enough, it comes with a treasure map. And I used this to locate the site. Now, once I found out where it was, you got to get permission to get on property, and it's like, I don't know anybody there. What am I going to do? And that comes to another twist of the story. My friend Bob McDowell. Bob was a charter member of the Millville Army Airfield Museum and Thunderbolt Advocates. We were both active in Thunderbolt Advocates at the time. And I had found, a couple years before, I had found a Curtis Helldiver crash site, which I found 2 .30 caliber machine guns. I later donated them to the New England Air Museum. But Bob was like, "Mike, how can you find machine guns?" It's like, and you didn't offer me one? You didn't give me one? And it's like, and cynically I said to Bob, "You know what, Bob? Next time I dig up a crash site and I find 2 machine guns, one of them is yours." And I said that. So Bob lived right in Mays Landing near the crash site, and I told him about what I found, and he secured permission to get on the site. So this is a site I have been drooling at for a decade, and I get out there and I find that they had the property. It was all swamp at one time, but in order to get peat for landscaping in Atlantic City, they had taken probably about 40 or 50 acres and completely, they dug a trench to drain the water down low, and they took all the surface stuff off to make peat for Atlantic City. So I'm out there, it's like, oh, they destroyed it. Oh man, and I'm metal detecting around, and it's like, yep, there's a piece of it. There's another one. And I walked around for 15, 20 minutes and got a dozen pieces or so. And I was almost to tears. It's like the best one ever, and they destroyed it. And then I got a big reading. Sounded like I found a battleship. It's like, what is that? So I dug down this deep, and I hit the back of 2 machine guns. And I'm by myself in the woods, and I said, oh my God, machine guns! Out loud. I went and got Bob to come over and help me, and it's like, I'm obligated. So that's how Bob got one of the guns. It's like, there's no way out of this. Museum has both of them now. But anyway, so we dug them out. I was in the military. I was small arms repairman, so I knew how to make sure that they were safe. There was no ammunition in them. That was kind of funny because they were embedded in a clay bed. I had to dig straight down and get to the cover plate and pop it open and make sure there was no ammo in the gun, and then also had to rod the barrel later on to make sure there was none in the chamber. So, but anyway, so we dug them out, and I thought that was the end of the story. I was still really angered that they destroyed my site. I dug down a little. I found a few more trinkets around the same area. I actually pasted off from the guns. Okay, if the guns were arranged this way, this is where the center section should have been. And I dug down there. I hit a few little pieces of the airplane. I hit a lot of sticks and a lot of black. It was almost like tar. It was solid. I almost had to chip it away. And I left that day thinking, oh, it could have been the best site ever. And over that weekend, I sat around still mourning over my site, and I remembered when I had dug on that PV1 in the swamp. In order to get to the PV1, I spent a day just removing sticks out of the site, and then I spent another day removing black mud that covered up the site. So I think, what happens if you take away the water from all that? You find exactly what I had found. So I went back wholeheartedly, and I dug straight down and was convinced I was going to keep going down till I found the airplane in China. And about 3 feet down, I hit the wing root, and it was a big solid piece. It wasn't coming out of the ground. It didn't give. I kept trying to get it around it. It kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it was at that point I knew what I had. So I later went to the owner of the property, and they had a gravel pit forward, and told them my dilemma, and they were kind enough to go in with the front end loader. They dug a trench alongside of it, and they went up and under and picked it all up out of there. One of the highlights was when the engine came out, because it was this big mass of dirt that started to erupt like that. Then pretty soon that engine pops out and a couple of propeller blades go flying. Wish I had a camera on it at the time. It was great. But from there we sifted through tons and tons of stuff. I think I took 8 truckloads out. They loaded the engine on the back of my truck with their front end loader. The truck went home like this. And little by little I loaded it all up over. It was a long time. There was most of the plane was broken up into little pieces. The largest piece was the side of the cockpit, and I got a surprise. This was still mounted on it. Obviously I have it on the plaque now, but these are the actual manufacturer's plates for that particular airplane, and it says Republic Thunderbolt Model P-47G, manufactured by Curtiss-Wright Corporation. Also, in case you're wondering, can you find a military airplane and just take it? It's like, hey, look what I found, it's mine. In that time period, with the World War II airplanes that had belonged to the Army Air Forces, there were no rules, the Air Force really didn't care. At the same time, the Navy cared a whole lot. More than once, I got into trouble with the Navy for some of my activities. And the Navy maintains that they own, quote, every paint chip and every rivet. But the Army, really the Air Force, they really didn't care that much. They a little bit more now because these things are now really old and really rare. So they're a little more sensitive to it, but it's like the Navy has been known to prosecute people for doing the same thing I did. As for the actual incident, how did this plane get there? It was a routine training mission from the Millville Army Airfield Flight Line. It was 5 ships went up to do aerial gunnery. They had a larger airplane that towed a screen out over the ocean, and the fighters would take turns taking shots at it. Each plane had a different color paint tip on their bullets, so that when they got back, you could tell who scored what. They also had a prescribed time for both the airfield traffic control and the pilot's flying time. So they completed their gunnery mission, and they were coming back, and they were doing some formation, a Louvebury formation, which is a big circle. And they were flying around trying to kill a half an hour, doing various maneuvers. So the flight leader noticed that his number 4 and 5 man were getting close together. What he didn't realize is that the number 5 man was getting annoyed and that they were dropping back, and he decided he was going to cut off the number 4 man. So what he did is he went below, and he was going to come up below in the turn, and both bad timing and the fact that a Navy Corsair flying in the same area was off on a parallel course to the left. So out of the corner of his eye, he saw the Corsair, thinking it was the Thunderbolt. So he came up right under the number 4 plane. That pilot was Flight Officer Eugene Palmer of South Dakota. Immediately, Palmer saw it right before it happened. There was no way to avoid it. Fox, who was the other pilot, his tail got cut off. He went into a flat spin and bailed out, and that plane crashed and burned. Palmer tried to turn around and make Millville. He reported immediately a vibration. If you look at the propeller, you can understand the vibration. And pretty soon he got smoke, and then he got fire, and he bailed out at 8,000 feet over that swamp. He landed okay. He did, when he hit the ground, he did bite his lip. There is a picture of him. You can clearly see he's got a swollen lip. But he survived, and both pilots went overseas. Another note on Palmer, he went over and was stationed in Belgium, and he got into a similar collision in about 3 months later, and they were doing a formation. He turned left when he should have turned right and hit the other guy, and he crashed and didn't survive. I visited his grave in Arlington around the same time period. We're happy to say that the propeller from that crash is out front of the Millville Army Airfield Museum. It's out front when you can see it day or night. But please, come by today, come visit the Millville Army Airfield Museum. We have a wonderful display of this story and thousands more dedicated to the thousands of veterans that went through this base and in World War II in general. So I hope to see you here.